Good morning or good afternoon, Enoch. How you doing today?
Doing great, doing great. Great to be here on your show with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I typically start by asking you, about your journey, how you ended up here, and today. So if you just give us a little bit of background and details into how you ended up being such a great gardener.
Okay, yeah, great. I love that. That's a great compliment right off the bat. But yeah, my journey really, started really when I was young, and as you can tell here from the background, I've got a lot of plants. I've loved growing plants, indoor plants, and all of that. And that started, with my mother. She had the same type of living room where there's plants everywhere and all of that. And so from a young age, I remember too. In fact, I got right behind me this spider plant, and it's got all these little spiderlets on it. That was my very first plant that she taught me how to propagate, and I got to grow, in my room, and I ended up taking it to school and showing it off and all that sort of stuff when I was young. So that really started my passion for growing in plants, basically. It wasn't until much later in life that I started finding out about gardening in general and growing my own food. You know, it was 14 years ago or so. I had a friend who, of course, uh, I have all these plants all the time, had them throughout my whole life, and he brought me a cucumber start and it was like, I don't know what to do with this, and I can't remember where he said he got it from or anything, but he brought it to me because I had all these plants, and he's like, I figured you would know what to do with this. and so uh and so I was like, well, I really have never grown anything food bearing plants or anything like that, or outdoor plants that you would have in a garden. And so basically I just did what I thought to do, get a big pot and get some soil and planted it up, and put it out on this balcony of an apartment I lived in. And throughout the summer, that thing just grew and stretched over and took over my whole balcony, and and had all these just wonderful cucumbers. And it was also another great sign that my daughter loved cucumbers. That was her favorite, one of her favorite fruits, and so I cut some up, and we sat and we're eating these cucumbers, and she was like really amazed at the fact that I grew these. I was like, yeah, I really grew these out there in out in the balcony and all of that. And she just couldn't believe it. But it was at that moment, really hanging out with her and enjoying these delicious cucumbers, that it just really hit me like a light bulb. Like, wait a minute, what have I been doing all this time? Not growing my own food and all of that. And fortunately, I tried the next season to grow a few more things on the balcony. It wasn't, again, not much space, but you can do a lot on a balcony. And I moved here to where I live now in Southern Oregon, and had just a little bit more space on my back patio. And so from there, I started growing some more. Of course, moved to tomatoes. Everybody, that's probably one of the first that we all get into when we're gardeners, is trying tomatoes and different varieties of that and other things. And within the next season or two, I'm trying to grow anything and everything I can. I'm building elevated raised bed boxes for my cemented patio. I'm containers we put up on top of this flat carport rooftop I've got, so I'm trying to find and expand space because I'm wanting to grow more and more that I can. And also I was fortunate enough too to move to where I did, right across the alley from me. My back door just basically comes right out into an alleyway, and right across from me, my neighbor was growing right along the alleyway. And he was growing this, I mean, this really tall, like 14, 15-foot high Mexican corn, just right out of an alleyway with all these other things. He had cucumbers and tomatoes and different stuff growing out there. And it just kind of, I was like, wow, um, utilizing that space I didn't think of. So I moved on to, like, okay, what's the alleyway right next to him, and then around the other side on the back. So we started growing on the alleyways and all of that. And that and the garden we put up on the carport started getting me some attention from the local neighborhood and all of that. And being on an alleyway, we had a lot of people walking through. And so my gardens are really public facing kind of gardens. And so a lot of people walking through, people who would actually come and walk through on purpose because they could see the garden up on the rooftop from blocks away, so they would come over to check out what it was growing and everything. And I got a suggestion from a couple of them, like, hey, you should share this. You should, put together something and share what you're doing because it's really cool. And so I started a local Facebook group to just kind of show off and put pictures and connect with people locally. And then that expanded to, breaking out the video camera and shooting some video and all of that. And I started making and editing my first videos that I started my YouTube channel on back at the very beginning of 2017. And from there, I mean, it's just what I like to tell people a lot is that gardening really changed my life, and from that point of starting that channel, just the connecting with the wider, larger gardening community, it's just been amazing. I've gotten to know so many great people. I took my channel and started traveling up and down the West Coast to kind of visit different gardeners and different organizations and authors and all of that. And, really connecting with people and making these really cool feature videos, which, kind of ran alongside of all of the stuff I was showing that I was growing. And then COVID came along. And from that, I attended a couple of Zoom meetings, and that just really kind of changed my outlook of what I was doing because I was traveling up and down the West Coast and wasn't able to get much further than that. And budget wise, to be able to travel around the country and visit some of these other people and all of that. And so from there, I kind of learned about the same program you're using here, StreamYard, and that just kind of changed every aspect of what I was thinking about what I was doing. And from there, we kind of started building the idea of our Let's Get Growing show, because that would now, instead of having to travel to go visit people, I can actually bring them right into my living room and
Mhm.
have all of these great conversations with people, from not just, around the country, but from around the world. We've had guests, from Australia, from the UK, from Norway, all over the world, that people have a huge passion for gardening, and growing and all of that. So, it's just, and then, here we are in our second season, tons and tons of just amazing, awesome guests on our show. And like I said, it's kind of amazing to think where a cucumber and this epiphany of growing and growing my own food here's taken me, here about 14 years later to, hosting and having my own gardening talk show to talk with all of these just wonderful, amazing people who have so much knowledge, more knowledge than I have for sure. I've never put myself out there in any of the stuff that I've done as an expert. I've got some knowledge. I've got some, things that I can share with people to help them grow and do all of that sort of stuff as well. But with what we're able to do with our show is to talk with so many people who do have just an amazing amount of knowledge when it comes to things. And especially folks like yourself, Leighton, who we just had on the show a couple of weeks back, and got to learn a lot more about soil biology and all of that. And that stuff just, is just one of the biggest bonuses about what I get to do is I get to, hang out, talk, and have conversations with people and learn so much. And if I'm learning as much as I'm learning, I know there's an incredible value to those out there as well too, to learn just as much.
Agreed. And what a great backstory, my friend. It all started with a cucumber seedling that was handed to you.
It's just amazing. I just,
Right? Right?
yeah, that thing changed my life, man. I'm telling you. And I
Well,
wouldn't have it. I wouldn't have it any other way either.
you need to get like a bronze cucumber and
I know
have
exactly,
it
right?
right on your desk.
Exactly. That's a
Okay,
great
maybe
idea.
get one that flaps like that flapping fish, so it
Oh yeah.
moves, right?
That would be exactly.
Yeah.
That's
So,
right.
it is amazing when you start to realize that there is a thirst for all of this knowledge, and that
Mhm.
you have an access to a platform like this where you can, share a lot of that information with people that want it, and then they can spread it. So
Yeah,
agree. That's
exactly.
that's the only reason I do this is my dedication to education. When I
Mhm.
started doing soil biology 15 years ago, I think now, actually,
Yeah,
it actually similar story. It led back to my childhood.
yeah.
Um,
The
but
roots
it
the
was,
roots start back then and
yeah, no,
and then develop into this great plant later on, you know?
but not in an intended way. It was like,
Yeah.
that childhood, like, strange enough, my mother gave me a spider plant. That was
Oh,
my
yeah.
first plant, and I too
Oh,
brought it
that's
to private school with me and watered it and
yeah.
took care of it. And when they had babies, I'd hand them out to my friends.
Mhm.
So it's funny how those little things touch your life in a way that has
Yeah.
long-term consequences.
Yeah, actually, and one of the early ones too that I got from my mother as well, besides the spider plants, would being my first, was, the idea of going to, like, show and tell when you're a kid in grade school and be able to show off things and stuff. So I remember taking the spider plant, but she also had, which really I thought was one of the most amazing plants that she had, and I didn't, realize until much later on in life, but, a sweet potato. She just grew a sweet potato, not for slips, but for a big, just huge plant, and she'd have to cut it back and everything. And I thought it was one of the most amazing, cool things that I took that as well to school to show that off as well. Like, look at this, it's growing from a potato.
Who knew?
Right? Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
the other one was I had a palm tree, and I forget, I think it was like elephant ear. It had those huge leaves
Oh,
on them.
yeah. Yeah. Those are great.
Yeah, so those are my plant buddies, throughout my younger years until I got to high school. And then it was more about women and cars, and plants got put on the shelf at that
Right,
point.
right. Yeah, yeah, I would have to say that for sure, like, in my earlier adulthood, the plants went, my when I came into my adulthood, I still always had plants, but it was literally maybe a shelf or 2, not much, and it wasn't until, like, later in my 30s and all of that, that I started building up what would be, a living room like my mother had, because I've always had that, love for plants. In fact, I'll tell another real quick story too about right behind me in this gray pot behind me is a pothos. And this was probably right around that time when I started growing and expanding my plant collection anyways, was as I was working for this restaurant and they were replacing all of their plants that they had. And I think they purchased the restaurant from someone else and were changing the front of the front of the house of the restaurant. And so they were changing out all these plants and they had just a pile of dead plants in this back of this lot that they had. And I just remember passing by one day, doing something or maybe taking out the garbage or whatever it was, and noticing that one of them had just this tiny little green node coming out of it. And I was like, oh man, that thing's still alive, you know? And so I went to my boss. I was like, "Hey, you got that pile of plants out back, is it all right if I take something out of that?" Asking permission before I, went in there and dug it out. And they were like, "Oh yeah, take whatever you want," But I went and grabbed this little tiniest plant with the little tiniest node, and mind you, the other vines were just completely dead. Cut it back, put it in a pot, and just within weeks, it was just growing back and everything. And I've grown that now. I do believe I was working at that restaurant around 1996 or 97. So I've had this pothos now since then for 26, 27 years. And it's grown in out many times. I've cut it back many times. I've taken those cuttings and given them to many different friends. So it's probably growing in dozens of other living rooms and all of that as well too. In fact, I've got 3 or 4 other pieces growing in pots around the house as well from that main plant. And again, too, it just kind of gets you back to the idea of how amazing nature is and amazing life is, and its persistence and in growing and what it'll do. You know, like you see some of those things that grow out of a crack in the sidewalk or something like that. You know, a little seed makes its way down there, and you've got this you know, plant or trees or things that'll just grow in some places. But you know, and some, you know, of course, need a little bit of care from us, you know, to kind of push them along or whatever. But yeah, it's just really kind of amazing, you know, plant life and everything. And again, too, that plant being a big part of my story and how I expanded and you know, and really grew my passion for growing, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the example of the plants that they grow out of the crack in the pavement.
Yeah,
Like
it
when I
ne
make
ceases to
compost.
amaze me.
Yeah, right. And so when I
Yeah.
was doing compost back in Connecticut, I
Mhm.
did two compost piles, one in spring and one in fall, so that the following season I always had compost that was ready to go. And one of the
Mhm.
things I did was I would always plant them, and I would start by grabbing, little seedlings and little shrubs, and
Yeah.
also always find the plant alongside the edge of the road that was thriving where everything else was dead. Because
Yeah.
I attributed it to that plant had something magic that allowed it
Mhm.
to survive in an incredibly difficult environment with no love whatsoever. I mean,
Yeah.
in Connecticut, they use salt on the roads in the winter. So
Right?
plant would survive being, embedded, encased in this really nasty salt that they used. It wasn't
Yeah.
really rock salt. It's this stuff they spray.
Yeah.
It's blue green, kind of like fertilizer, but for whatever reason it does not. It sticks to the road in a way that they don't have to continuously add more and more salt. So
Mhm.
imagine being caked with that shit. So,
Right?
right? So yeah,
Yeah, and another thing too, and that was one of the things that I thought was really great, and I'd only heard just a little bit here and there about it, but when you were on the show with me a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how, you know, these sort of things that are, you know, chemicals or whatever they are get into our soil, you know, however that happens, that, you know, nature will find a way to break that down. Nature will find a way to, you know, take care of that in the long run. You know, it is damaging in the immediate effect, but, you know, and I just, you know, I just think that again too is just one of those things that, about nature and all of that, you know, as they talk about, you know, this world will continue to grow and plants will take over long after we're gone, you know?
right, right.
Yeah.
The old saying, "Are we growing them or are they growing us?"
Exactly. I love that saying too. I just had this last weekend on from Australia, this gentleman named Charlie McGee, who is a frontman for a band called Formidable Vegetable, and one of their songs is "We are what we eat, what we eat and what it eats," and you know, and then it's just kind of this circle of, you know, whatever, you know. So in the long run, you know, are they eating us or are we eating them?
Well, I think it was all fair until we started burying ourselves in concrete sarcophaguses.
Right. Yeah. Exactly, and
Before
then
that, we were just pine boxes that allowed the nutrients to go right back into the soil again. So
yeah, exactly, and, yeah, I, always tell my daughters, like, if I could, you know, when I die or whatever, if you can, try to get me up out of whatever place I'm in or whatever, don't let them embalm me or anything, just go grab me up and take me out into the middle of the forest somewhere and just bury me.
right, I've
Yeah,
told
just put me back right into the earth and let the earth do what it needs to do with me, because I think that's exactly what was supposed to what the intention is.
I agreed 100%. I've told all three of my children that when I pass, do not cremate me, compost me.
Yeah, yeah, she's like, "Dad, I think that's illegal." And it
Well,
says
actually, it's not. I think in Oregon you can do it,
Yeah,
or is
well,
it
I
Washington? And
well, that
California is passed the law that's good.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look into that for sure and make sure it's definitely a part of my, my life plans or whatever.
yeah,
End of life
right.
plans, right?
Agreed 100%. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your rooftop garden. I think that's just a wonderful idea and a great use of that space. What gave you that idea?
Yeah, well, again, too, it really was about the fact of limited space. This and it came up really really early on in my gardening or my food growing when I moved here to Oregon in this place. And I still live in the same place, you know, that I moved in when I first moved here. And all we had was this just little cemented back patio. It's really, that's all my vision could let me see basically at that point, you know, and as far as what I was capable of using in my space. And so as I filled up that back patio again with these elevated raised beds and started growing all this sort of stuff, and as any new gardeners, we all know, we just, you know, once we get hooked in, we want to grow everything and anything possible. We're collecting any and every seed packets and seeds we can get and everything. And so again, it just became a point of like, okay, well, I've ran into the limit of my space. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to grow, you know, some of these other things? And what I and what I had found and discovered just prior to that was um, earth buckets, water wicking, utilizing 5-gallon buckets and creating these water wicking bucket systems. And I found those early on, and started building these up. And I worked for a place where I could get a bunch of them, you know, so I had a bunch of them. And instead of wherever they go from there, you know, I thought it was the best use of that is to reuse it, give it another life, you know, build these buckets and containers. And so I started growing peppers in them and growing all these different pepper varieties and everything. And one day and I can't remember exactly why or how it came about, but I was just looking at those buckets and these peppers and thinking, man, I've got more of them. I wish I could have space to, you know, plant some more pepper varieties, you know. And just one day I looked up and was like, and looked back at those buckets again and looked back up, and I was like, wait a minute. I think those will go perfectly right up there. And I was just actually at the point just thinking right along the edge too. So what I did was built myself a little ladder out of some wood I had. So I built a little ladder, propped it up there, and hiked up some of these buckets and put them right there along the edge. But it was also while I was putting them on the edge there up on the ladder, I was looking across this flat rooftop. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to just do them on the edge either, you know? And then so here comes my mind going, okay, now I need to get more buckets. I need to build more of these earth wicking buckets and everything. And from that point, I think we got up to about 40, 45 different buckets up there growing uh lots of different peppers, and we were doing tomatoes and some other heat loving plants and everything. Vines didn't work very well because they would come up and over and hit this really hot rooftop, and it just wasn't the best for them. I did try to do as much like getting them to grow up as possible, but you know, they eventually get down. So so we tried a bunch of different things up there, and it was just really fun. And I'll just say that ultimately, after a couple of years of doing that, and I had them up there for a few years, the owners of this place, who never came around hardly ever, came by doing some sort of inspection or something for something they needed to do, and discovered my rooftop pepper garden, and we're like, hey, yeah, that doesn't fly for us. We don't want those up there. I was like, what? No way. I was devastated because I ended up having to take them all down. And that whole thing, you know, ended up having to, you know, stop for that time being. But luckily for me, and for me, that just this last year, they sold this place to a new owner, and the new owner just loves everything I do, you know. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, can I, you know, I first started with, can I go back here and do this? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. Whatever you want to do sounds great with us. And so I said, well, you know, I'm going to tell you, I did have this really awesome pepper garden that was up on the carport rooftop. And I was like, you know, I was showing them the buckets and everything. And they're like, oh yeah, if you want to do that too, go ahead. Absolutely. Just, I love everything you do. Go for it. And so this next year, we will be revitalizing and re-putting up the whole pepper garden up onto the rooftop and covering all of that, and hopefully making some videos about that as well too, because I know that's something that some of the people who watch my channel kind of miss, is the rooftop pepper garden we used to have.
Well, the reason I asked that question was because you solved a couple major issues without even realizing it.
Yeah.
One, watering. Watering is a huge issue. If you had to dry clothes up there every day, that would be a nightmare.
Yep.
Second, how do you keep the soil cool? And
Yeah.
your bucket tech is ideal for that exact scenario.
Yep. Exactly.
So, well done, my friend. Well done.
Yeah, thanks. And again too, it was, and that was a part of too that discovery when I was looking at those buckets and looking at that rooftop, because that was a part of the thought process. Because when I was thinking about the rooftop, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do to water that? I can get up there every day and try to water that stuff, and then then my attention goes, oh, the buckets. Those things and I always, and we still promote those. There's some of the biggest videos we have on my channel is, how to build those, how to put those together and all of that too. Is that during some of our hottest parts of summer, 110 degree days, where I do with other containers and things, we either have to have some sort of drip, or I have to get out there a couple of times a day to make sure that they're not drying out, because being more of a soil expert, a dry container is probably one of the worst things that can happen to a plant, because then they'll become hydrophobic. It becomes so hard to get them to retake that moisture again, but with these earth buckets, that's not a problem. And with the way they use that reservoir of water at the bottom there, I can get a few days out of them, or at least a couple of days, even in the hottest part of summer, to make sure that, even if I had to go away for a couple of days or something, as long as I get up there and make sure that reservoir is filled up just right, I can walk away from them for a while.
Yep.
And so that just worked perfectly with that idea of doing those up on the rooftop. I wouldn't have tried them with any other type of container. I probably wouldn't have had that rooftop garden if it wasn't for
everything
discovering that.
Yeah.
Unless I could have gotten, and mind you, I might have thought of ways to maybe get up there and build some of those elevated boxes or something and get the drip up there or something like that if I could have eventually, but that would have been a lot more complicated, and I probably would have been less inclined to take and make that effort. So just discovering those earth buckets was just a blessing in that sort of sense, because again, it did really just help me expand that garden space.
Hey, the universe hard at work. Right.
Amazing.
Right.
Just like, everything, just like the cucumber, right? You know what I mean? It's like just these universal interventions that are just helping move my existence forward in the way it's supposed to be, because really, I truly believe this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Well, and honestly, you couldn't have done it with the raised beds. They'd be too heavy. You'd have caused problems with the carport structurally.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
The buckets are perfect. They displace the weight. They have the water already in place, prevent the hydrophobic, keep it cool. So that was just a win-win-win across the line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I can't wait to get them back up there again and get that pepper garden again. It's just going to be really great. That, and with the new owner too, one of our projects this next week. And I do this on my show all the time. I'm like pointing this direction, right? Here's my front yard. But right out front right here is where we're going to start putting in raised beds and doing all that too. So we get to expand right out into the front yard this next year. And this is a duplex I live in. And my new owner is actually my neighbor. So it's really great. So he's going to do his side. I'm going to do my side. We're going to be able to expand out and do all sorts of stuff. So, really, creating that more of a public garden space, that ultimately what I want to do is to have that and the rest of what we have around with the rooftop and what we do in the alleyways and all of that kind of create almost an urban garden education center. With the back space and everything, we've got perfect spot to kind of bring in groups of people and be able to kind of maybe do whatever I can in teaching and helping people expand their spaces and help them through the thought process of what what it takes to kind of look at things a little bit differently and see your space differently, so that you can use it to grow more food, in especially in city spaces and all of that.
So you jumped the gun.
There we go.
Before we go there, another thing is that you really should get some cameras outside so that you can, like, while you're talking on your podcast, click a switch and it beams to a camera that's mounted outside. They have these incredible
Oh yeah.
that are solar powered. They don't use Wi-Fi. They use cellular, so you can place them anywhere you want. They
Yeah.
don't need power. They don't need Wi-Fi, and you can get a signal, and then, like, literally watch them on your phone or watch them on your computer, and that would be a great addition to your podcast, because you can, instead of pointing, there's my yard.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's my yard.
Boom, take a look at it. Exactly. Even more so too when it's all built out right. That's just right. And I've kind of thought about that a little bit before, but yeah, again, too, knowing I'm not one of the most technical people. So when
Oh,
it
I'm
comes
not
down
either. It comes to
but
computers, forget it.
when things are just getting made to make this stuff so much more easier, like you're saying, with Wi-Fi or being able to pull this through your phone or into these camera systems, are just really amazing. It's definitely something I'm going to have to think about more so as we get moving into the next season or two, for sure. That would be really great. Almost
So,
maybe even create a live one too, where
well,
you have just a whole like live stream that just runs constantly, and you can just always go and check. You can just check out whatever's growing on in the backyard if you want,
or
or the
what
front
season
yard.
it is, what the temperature, or not temperature, but what the precipitation is, because you probably get a
Yeah.
little snow up there, don't you?
Just a little bit, but then that gets us into that whole climate change subject as well too, because that is something that has really changed since I've been here in Southern Oregon and lived here. Because when I first started my gardens here, um, all those years ago, yeah, we would get winters that were just snow would pile up. I worked for this place where we would have to get out and clear the walkways and do all of that sort of stuff. And in the years since, that's become less and less. In fact, I don't think we've really had a good snow here that is stuck around. That's what we kind of consider a good snow. It's snowed, but like in the evening, we'll get some snow. By the next morning, when the sun comes out, it's pretty much melted and gone. So we've had a couple of those over the last couple of years. But yeah, it's probably been about, I would say, a good 6-7 years or so since we've had like a decent winter snow here, and it used to all the time. It's just really kind of crazy how much that's changed. And our summer's getting hotter and longer. Right now it's we're now well into, actually we are now about to move into the second week of October, and I think yesterday was 88 degrees. Today is going to be 87 degrees. I see in our 10-day forecast that we'll be in the high 70s 10 days from now, which will take us well in towards later October. And that's completely unheard of.
Wow.
Just unheard of for us. And just kind of really, which then kind of starts creating more of things that we have to do to kind of strategize and think about those sort of things as we're trying to, help our gardens get through that sort of stuff. When I first started gardening, like I said, I could grow almost any tomato variety I wanted to. All these just wonderful heirlooms and all of that sort of stuff. I can't do that anymore because I have to specifically search out and find heat tolerant varieties that will handle higher temperatures during the summertime. And even some of those varieties, will take a break when it gets to the hottest point. So I don't, can't grow all those great heirlooms. I mean, I still try, but it still becomes that same sort of situation, where, just too much fruit drop, and then and that is kind of something though, too. The later season crops that we're able to get off some of that stuff is getting better, but that's all because of, it's staying warmer later, and that's not good in other ways.
So you're almost 2 crop seasonal now.
Yeah. Try to get as much as I can, get them out early, and early as I possibly can, hopefully get some fruit and some sort of harvest before the summer temperatures get to their extreme. And then we got to wait out that time period. And this is very similar for folks who live more south than me. This is, this is kind of, how they have to grow. I talk to a lot of people who grow in Texas, or, in Southern California and all of that. And they talk about, so summertime and that hot time is kind of the break that a lot of people would take during the winter time.
Exactly.
And that used to be wintertime for me, and now it's kind of moving and transitioning that further north for us up here, where we're having that same sort of situation.
So your hardness has probably changed at least a couple digits too. Then the hardness
The
scale of how to plant. I forget the name of it. The scale that the USDA uses to tell
the
you.
hardiness zones. Yeah, they did do that change, but actually mine didn't change. We were considered an 8B right here. But even just around us, though, too, there were changes and things like that because they did center in more. It got more localized what they were utilizing as far as the information to do that. But yeah. And again, too, that being more for the perennial stuff and the trees and shrubs and those sort of things that we're planting and all of that. But yeah, for like our annual growth and all of that stuff, for our annuals and the things that we're growing, it's still a learning process right now to try to figure out what that transition is and what it's going to ultimately look like for us. Because this, is this going to level out at some point, right? Is this going to become consistent at some point where we can actually just, utilize things that we learned from last year? Because every time I write things down in my garden journal and talk about, what things were and the information I'm keeping from the previous year, so I can try to carry that on into my next year, which I used to tell people all the time, keep a garden journal. It's hard to say that anymore because that information I have from last year isn't as applicable to this year because things just changed as much.
Mhm.
And it's really, and as gardeners, we can see that a lot more than maybe a lot of average people who aren't noticing as much. That, and it's hard to not notice, really. But as gardeners, we can really we're more hyper aware of these sort of things because of those types of changes and what it means for what we're trying to grow.
Well, you're connected to the soil and the plant. There's a big
Yeah.
difference between that and the people that do a 9 to 5 job who, let's face it, when they get home, they're burnt out and tired.
Yep.
Some of them want to
Yep.
go play in the garden, but the vast majority of them are still trying to keep up with kids, wife, events, daily activities, and the emails and all the other nonsense that we're getting bombed with these days.
Yeah.
Difficult, you
Yeah,
really.
it's just such a fast-paced lifestyle anymore that we have today, and that is another thing that's really interesting to kind of watch and in this evolution of things, whether it's the weather or even our own lives, is from how even when I was a kid, they all thought life was a fast-paced life, where little did they know what was ahead in the future, right? And exactly.
I mean, that's what's hard to connect with the newer generations because they just don't get it. It's like
Mhm.
you tell them, "Oh, we drove around, running around the car, no seatbelts, hanging out the windows,
Yeah.
all this chaos." Like our parents just sent us out the door. I mean, they even had
Yeah.
TV commercials for the parents at night, 10 o'clock. It was always, "Where do you know where your child is?"
Yeah,
Right? Because we
exactly.
live outside, drink out of the hose, eat where whoever's mom had something to eat, we'd eat there.
Oh, yeah, we used to even have that we even had when I was a kid too, one of those station wagons with that seat in the back that popped up the opposite direction where
Yeah,
the
rear
kids could
facing.
look right at the car that's driving right behind you. Oh my gosh.
So my sister and I, well, I started it, but my sister and I really got into this. We'd make sure that we stole a roll of thread from my mother's sewing box
Yeah.
when we'd go on our trip from Mass to Maine, and we'd steal some of my father's old paper towels, the real thick ones with the ribs on them. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember, they were white and they
Yeah.
folded. They were in a big stack, and you pull one out and it just kept folding, kind of like paper towels do in the displays, in
Yeah.
those things you pull down now.
Yeah.
And we tie this thread to the news or the paper towel, kind of
Yeah.
in a bow tie shape.
Right.
and we'd fly kites out the window, out of the back of the window of the station wagon, and we'd
Oh,
like
yeah.
let them go all the way up, and we'd be like try to touch the car without getting it sucked into the car and breaking the thread. So that
Yeah.
we would do this the whole way up to Maine. Our parents had no fucking idea. They'd have truckers honking at us, people like bombing around us to get these fucking crazy kids putting kites on our friggin' windshield.
Oh my gosh, the stuff we did, the things that
Oh,
we oh my, it's yeah, yeah. Again, too, again, I maybe it's great that we're a little more safe, think about safety a little bit more when it comes to things, but then at the same time, it's the that again, society is really uh, hyper,
sensitive.
active and sensitive and just all of that as well too, so there's probably a little give and take to what things could be versus what they were.
Agree, my friend. And yeah, the along with all those restrictions was a lot of loss of freedoms too. So it's
Yeah,
it's sad that our generation experienced things that the next generations never had an opportunity to even understand, is like what how much fun we were actually having, and how much
mhm,
freedom and time. I mean, time
yeah,
is having time off is an amazing thing, and especially for a gardener, because it lets you spend more time connecting with the
yeah,
soil and the plants. And the generations behind me, or my kids and the kids underneath them, are they don't have those freedoms. They just don't have that
mhm,
time. It's sad, but again, shows like this will encourage them to start with a cucumber or a spider plant,
yeah,
and maybe it will eventually get them to the point where, like when I was married, my ex-wife now and I started a garden when we first got married, and I was so excited to get home, snap open a cold beer, she'd pour a wine, we go out and play in the garden.
yeah,
That was our way to unwind and talk and connect. And
mhm,
so, unfortunately, though, nowadays those kids are at such a fast pace that it's difficult. They have to really make a commitment to do that.
yeah, yeah.
Hopefully,
Well,
we can encourage them to do that.
that's it, yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna say is that becomes then more and more it becomes more and more important for folks like ourselves to be able to put out whatever message, whatever kind of communication we can out there to kind of make this next generation more aware of these sort of things, because in a fast-paced society that they're growing up in, and even more so as we go further into the future, it's going to become more and more important that we are teaching and showing people how to pull back, how to find some sort of you know maybe it isn't necessarily gardening as much as I'd love for people to all find gardening and grow. I believe everybody can and should, but find ways to pull back and find an escape from the heavy weight of what a fast-paced lifestyle is, because that we're only looking at more mental issues and problems and things like that. Mental health in gardening is huge. And really helps with us to be able to kind of slow things down and think about things a little bit differently, and then make that connection with nature becomes even more important too, because that's really what we're supposed to be doing as people. We're part of a natural world, and the further we get away from that, more and more problems I think we'll have. So then again, becomes even more important for us to communicate this out to the world, that this is really important. These are things that we should be staying connected with. No matter how fast our lifestyle gets, we should be, hopefully growing some plants. Whether you got some nice little plant garden in your house that's just right there where you can, water and take care of them and make some sort of connection, or expand out even further outside into a garden, or if you don't have the space, to a community garden, that sort of stuff. Just you know, um, I really truly believe that, because, again, as I said too about how I believe gardening saved my life, is what I tell people. It changed my life for one, but it really saved my life. I, was going through when I was building and doing some of that early stuff with my early gardens and everything, I was going through a real hard time in life. had some real heavy issues, happening to me, death of a really close person to me, and some other things with family and stuff that were just really hard. And I really was feeling like I was losing my mind, my connection with the world, at some point. And it was through that gardening and through growing these different plants and things that I was able to connect with the world a bit better, and to, think about and work through things a lot better, because of that connection. And so, I believe, that's why I believe it's so important in the long run that people know and understand how, you know, how how much a garden really can affect our lives more than just getting food or pretty flowers, a great landscape, if you're a landscape gardener, or or house plants or anything, is it to me. I know it through experience. And when we talk about how heavy the world can be, the weight of, a fast-paced lifestyle or anything else too, comes these sort of mental health things that we have to be thinking about. And one of the easiest, most natural ways, other than any of these other, pharmaceuticals or whatever and things out there, is to grow some plants, learn about our connection with nature and get out there and connect. And that, that can be so relieving in such a, hard, situations in life.
Agreed 100%. And I think it goes a lot deeper, if you've looked into grounding and how important that is for us.
Hmm.
The ground releases electrons. The electrons keep us humans, we are electrical beings, in a higher vibration, which prevents depression and provides connection to source, whether you want to call that God, universe, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's changing our vibration in a way that is beneficial and prevents those kind of depressions. So it is easier to handle those kind of crises in your life. I mean,
Yeah.
the old saying, "Go hug a tree," or "You're a
Yeah.
tree hugger." No, there's scientific data that proves that tree is releasing electrons to you. And the
Yeah.
latest one is about pets. And people wondered why, you give an elderly person a pet, or the coolest one was this jail that started allowing good uh, uh, inmates to have a pet if they're showing the proper
Right.
responsibility. And it changes their whole friggin' perspective. These guys are no longer fighting. They're no longer, creating gangs and all this other shit, because that pet is outside collecting electrons. That's what they do. They
Yeah.
collect the electrons, and then when they sit in your lap or they come up and cuddle and purr, that's their way of releasing the electrons to you, so that they
Yeah.
can harvest more. And this. So whether it's a tree or a pet, it's bringing you back to that connection of, hey, you're a part of this huge system, and yet you're
Yeah.
isolating. You're wearing shoes. You're covering up. You're not getting sun. You're not getting vitamin D. And you're going to put on suntan lotion because you're scared of getting a sunburn. Well,
Hmm.
sunburn is there to protect you. It's to tell you, all right, you spent too much time out here.
Yeah.
It's not going to give you cancer. It's just a way to let your body's trying to tell you how to
Hmm.
your exposure to the vitamin D. Yeah,
Yeah.
the UVs have gotten a lot more intense, and there are, truly some issues about spending too much time in the sun.
Yeah.
But there's also the other side, is you see these, farm workers that are bundled head to toe and covered. They're never getting any vitamin D. And so
Right.
you got to really kind of figure out the balance between grounding and connecting to the sun. I mean, have you ever heard of sun watching or sun gazing?
I
It,
I've heard the term.
Yeah, so it's an interesting phenomenon that I practice when I can, and that is the sun has to be low in the sky. It could either be sunrise or sunset, but you want it to be as low as it possibly could be.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, you can stare at the sun. It
Oh,
takes a little practice.
yeah.
It's not going to kill you. You're not going to go blind. I promise you that. But eventually, you'll get the eye muscles where you can stare at it and you can actually see a blue circle inside the yellow aura around it.
Yeah.
When you see that blue circle and it's spinning, it's almost like Morse code. It's almost talking to you. But
Wow.
the the allowing of that vitamin D and that light waves into your, your iris, into your, pupil, is an amazing way to recharge. Now you're getting photons. You're not getting electrons and protons. You're getting photons directly into your brain, into your pineal gland. And the pineal gland is your spirituality, is your connection to, all things around you. So it's a great way to charge yourself. And it's one of those practices that we've lost, like so many other, and nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
So I try to give people these, insights, like, go hug a tree. You're not crazy. You're going to feel better if you do it, right? You might laugh at the beginning, but eventually, if you do it every day for a period of time, you're going to feel it. You're going to connect to that tree. And then all of a sudden, you're really going to be like, wow, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, these ancient practices that we don't talk about anymore need to come back into the, mainstream. And we need to have conversations like this about that. So people don't think it's woo-woo. They actually try it. And
just give it a shot.
Speaking of trying, have you ever tried electroculture?
I haven't, no.
Okay, I want you to look into that, because that's another amazing example of how to harvest the charges that are in our atmosphere and transfer them to the plant, because the ground is negatively charged, the atmosphere is positively charged. That's why we have an ionosphere. So there's different techniques of wrapping copper wires around branches or bamboo sticks, put a little like old aerial antenna on the top of it, made just out of copper wire. And that copper wire that you made the little aerial array and then wound down the stick, and you put that into the soil. And it charges the plants. The plants grow bigger, they grow more healthy. Fruiting is bigger, sweeter, all across the board. So, you know what? Do me a favor, and in the future, do an experiment with this, side by side. So one plant gets the little electroculture antenna and the other one doesn't. Water them the same, keep them in the same amount of sunlight, but watch it, brother. I'm telling you. And I want you to come back on here and explain to people what you experienced when you did
this. Is this mainly for in ground, or can it be done through?
It can be done anywhere. It's
in
basically
a container.
Yeah, if it's in a container, no problem. That container will be absorbing the energy out of the atmosphere. And it can be in the ground. I mean, what they've found is that if you're doing like row crops on a right in the ground, that you might have to use 2 or 3 of them, depending on spacing and depending on the number of plants. Some of the guys will put one on each corner of the long windrow, or not windrow, I'm talking compost here, or planting row, right? So that they're getting all 4 corners, so that they're guaranteeing that there's enough energy being transferred to all of the plants. But yeah, you're going to have a blast with that one, dude. I'm telling you right now, it's going to pop your cork. And you're going to be like, oh my God, why didn't I know about this? And then you can tell all your people about it, so that, again, this is technology that was widely used until, I won't be a conspiracy theorist, but the elite started to control the atmosphere and our education and stuff. So anyway, little tricks.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's definitely with most anything out there, it's those things are always definitely worth some experiments. I mean, that's one of the things that's is fun about gardening, is that it's really, gardening's really flexible, and a lot of folks out there are like, I can't grow, well, go out and have some fun with it, experiment, try some stuff, and just and see where it takes you, and do and do that. It's again, one of those other reasons for getting in and giving it a try, is just to even see what's possible, and see what you thought might be impossible is possible. Yeah.
So Perpetual's, I'm loving his mindset here. He's been a loyal fan for quite some time, and he had actually suggested utilizing shade cloth on your carport, which I think is a great idea.
Oh yeah.
So all 4 corners, set up a post, fasten it.
Yeah, I've had to do that. I've actually had to do that. And with the early garden, we had a setup where what I did was I took a couple of buckets, and I took some PVC pipe and cemented them into a bucket, and then took the 4 buckets out and made a big old kind of 4 poles around the
Yep.
garden, and then had a little attachments for the shade cloth right up on there and clicked them on each one and had a nice little shade cover over the garden.
Nice.
I'm gonna have to do the buckets over again because when we took them down, we got rid of the cemented buckets, but we'll have to do that again for sure. Because again, this comes down to the idea, is that full sun. When we see full sun on the back of a seed packet, they don't really mean full sun. You know what I mean? When you're at the height of the day, when it's at such high temperatures and you know the the hottest point of summertime and all of that, that sun is just heavy on some plants, and even on your sun-loving plants will get burnt up. And so, if you are growing on a rooftop like that, that is kind of an important thing to think about, is to find some ways to do some sort of shading during that time of year. So, I mean, I had those buckets up there, but that shade cloth didn't have to be up all the time, just for those, just for that, 6 weeks or so during the summertime when it's just really intense. Yep.
Yeah. So
Good,
I've
like
had
40% shade cloth too is probably really good, is what I would say. Yeah.
so I've had some experience with rooftop gardens as well, but that was back east, and we don't deal with. We have hot weather, but it's always humid, so
Yeah.
it's not like the dry air out here that just cooks the plant.
Yeah.
And so we were blessed that if even in the city where you're dealing with like 100-degree weather on the rooftop, it's still not a problem because of that humidity. Helps the plant not
Yeah.
transpire so much that it starts killing itself or shutting down the stoma and stopping all growth. So
Yeah.
it's a big challenge out here versus back east.
Yeah, exactly. And again, too, it just becomes one of those things you've got to consider, when you're growing, especially container gardening and container growing. And I see I've got my facilitator Jay in the chat right now too for our streams, and she was just asking about, and I might have missed the actual question from Perpetual is asking about the type of soil in those buckets. And maybe this is something maybe I would be asking you in a sense too, because again, I'm not an expert or anything. I just get out there similar to what I was just talking about before. Is this is a lot of experimentation, a lot of that sort of stuff. Though I'd have to say I've found some successes. I've just made some of my own mixes out of some again, we're urban gardening, and a lot of people, and a lot of what I do is show people what they can do with things that they can get a hold of themselves. So I've gone to nurseries and other garden centers and things like that and tried different types of soils that they might have. And so anymore, I'm just basically utilizing what type of soil I can get. I have a big old pile out there that I do. So I'll, get whatever soil I have, I'll dump it out and I'll let it kind of get into the rest of the soil. End of year plants that we are kind of changing out some containers and things, I'll kind of cycle those back in there. And then for the most part, we have some compost, a couple of different compost piles. I have one out in the alleyway. And then I have also like a large, garbage can composter that I have. And so I'll add in some of that stuff that I'll do, and then I'll mix some soil, maybe adding in some sort of rock, whether it's perlite or something like that to create some more aeration and that sort of stuff. And then I'll mix that up really good, and we'll utilize that as the base and what we get started with. And from there, actually, the last year or two, I've just been using vermicompost tea for feeding that. So I just kind of try to build that soil biology utilizing that. But that's kind of what I've done. So I don't really get too intense into thinking about exactly what I'm trying to do, or part for part, or any of that sort of stuff. And I could grow some really great pepper plants, and I've had some of the really coolest and best eggplants I've ever grown this year out of some of those containers. But again, maybe that's something I would ask you. What do you think about as far as soil and as what we could be doing as far as tactics and things to handle containers?
So, that's a great question. So about, I don't know, 8 years ago, I kind of burned out in these giant projects all across the country. I did that for a number of years. Then I moved into very, very high-end landscapes on sensitive watersheds where they couldn't be using, or they were not supposed to be using synthetic fertilizers because they were developing, they were knocking down little houses and putting up mansions. So there was all of the necessary permitting that was required because they were creating all these impervious surfaces in their landscape that they had to deal with extra water pressure, and the states and the local boards were like, we don't want to give you this permit because you're basically going to pollute our watershed. And so I got involved with those, and basically I go in and explain to the board, or Save the Turtle group or Save the Seaweed group, whoever they were, and explain to them that no, we're going to be doing 100% biologicals. Well, that led into what we call inappropriate planting by architects. So the architect would want to plant a swamp maple and then surround it with boxwoods. European boxwoods was very common. And the swamp maple wants wet feet, but the boxwoods want dry feet. And it was on the same damn irrigation. So I started by saying to the architect, hey, look, can we just put 2 zones on this plant so I can, water the plants appropriately, and not have, them struggle or die off because of either too much water or not enough water. And of course, the answer was no, that's complicated. Now you're doubling every single irrigation zone. We're already 300 zones. We can't go to 600. And so I was forced to engineer soils. So I started blending, more sands and clays and silts in with the existing soil, or having complete custom blends made it up. Because a lot of times the first thing the developer does is come in and plow off all the topsoil, or what was there, and sell that to somebody. And then when the landscapers came in, there was no organic matter. There was nothing. It was a substance. So I was forced to build these soils up back to a healthy, functional soil system. So anyway, after, a few years of that, and then having, when I hand the homeowner the keys and say, okay, just make sure you hire an organic land care company. I should have managed it, but I trusted these people to do the right thing. And sure as shit, I'd see, I'd come to be making a tea for them, 6 months, a year after I'd finished. And I'd see an organic land care company roll in, bunch of guys jump out with backpack sprayers and start spraying fungicides and herbicides. Oh my God, you just killed a year and a half, 2 years worth of my work in a matter of 24 hours. So, and now I'm like, oh God, I have guilty conscience because I was the one that allowed this McMansion to be built on this very sensitive watershed area only to be polluted. So I was like, enough is enough with you guys. I'm not going to do this anymore. So then I got involved in the cannabis community. And so I started a conference. We traveled the country. It was called the Science of Regenerative and Organic Cannabis Cultivation. And I think on the very first conference, I stood up and talked to the cannabis community about their potting soil, which I called soilless medium. And I said, look, you really need to use sand, silt, and clay in your mixes, because you're never going to get full genetic potential out of these plants because you can't support the microbial communities that live on the sand, silt, and clay and release that nutrient back to the plant available. And they laughed at me. They're like, oh, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, well, I've demonstrated this, and I'm going to create a formula for you guys, and we're going to call it the horizontal soil horizontal system. So that you basically have sand at the bottom, then you have an A horizon, which is a mix of sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. Then you have your soilless medium on the top, and that's going to function really well for you guys. You're going to not have all the watering issues you have right now, because right now your surface of your pot goes hydrophilic and the sides go hydrophilic. So when you water it, the water just runs off the top and down the sides, and you're fighting to get that to be hydrophobic again, or hydrophilic again. Meanwhile, the bottom of the pot's going anaerobic because it's just caked in soil of moisture, and it can't escape because you have the bacteria create a biofilm over the whole surface of the soil. So again, laughed at, what do you know? You're not a cannabis cultivator. I'm like, well, you guys, cannabis is just another plant. And to be
Mhm.
honest, it's a friggin' weed. So it's not that hard to grow. Now, you
Yeah.
want the genetic potential. I understand you're going to want to use some tricks to really, get the frost to come out to get those secondary and tertiary metabolites that you're looking for. I understand that. That's not a problem. But with this system, it will never go hydrophobic. You will never have anaerobic zones. And if you overwater it, there's these little weep holes in the side that prevent the E horizon from, or the A horizon from getting too wet and going anaerobic. And so everybody that tried it over the last 8 years has come back and said, "Oh my God, thank you so much, Leighton. I really appreciate, you bringing this forth to the community because it's so much easier." I've had guys say, "I can now leave my cannabis plant in my tent for 2 weeks. All I do is fill up the E horizon until it leaks out, and I take off, and I don't have to worry about watering it as the lights come on and off, and I can
Yeah.
take vacation." So that might be a really good trick for you guys. I have a number of podcasts on it on YouTube. Just search Leighton Morrison for the Horizontal Soil System or
Yeah.
Soil Horizons, and I give you a step-by-step walkthrough on how to do it.
I
Tricks.
really like that concept. The only thing I would wonder is because it is layered like that, you've got the bottom layer sand, right? You're moving up and that sort of thing. With those sort of earth buckets that I use,
Mhm.
I don't know if sand would necessarily work as far as because it uses a net pot that goes into the water reservoir to help, create the
We call that
capillary action.
exactly. So basically, you've kind of mimicked the system. The only
Yeah,
difference is you don't have the silt and the
yeah,
clay and the sand mixed into your potting mix, which
right.
if you do that, now when you put your vermicompost tea on,
Yeah,
those organisms, the bacteria specifically, will begin to mine nutrients
yeah.
out of that and provide another layer of nutritional and all the minerals and metabolites that the plants really want to express their potential.
Yeah,
That's what's one of the things like that I try to explain to people. You have all of the fertility you need is already locked up in your soil. The
yeah,
only thing you don't have is the diverse biology necessary to mine it and make it, stored in their body, the bacteria. And then the
mhm,
critical part is you need the nutrient cyclers. That's the
yeah,
protozoa and nematodes that
yeah,
eat the bacteria. They can't take the end because it'll make them explode. So they have to get rid of the end and they have to get rid of all of the other things we call minerals in the pantry.
yeah,
So inside the bacteria is a pantry, and that bacteria uses that pantry when pH goes up or down, water comes in or doesn't, it's not available. There's a shift in temperature. There's a million different things that they use that pantry to support their outer shell to protect them.
yeah,
Uh, so when that protozoa swims by, especially in the rhizosphere, eats that bacteria and grabs the carbon, poops out everything else, that's all now plant available. And so
mhm,
again, it's allowing the genetic potential of the plant to be expressed.
yeah.
That
I
was
I I think in one thing too, though, is and this might be something as we're rebuilding and resetting up some of those elevated beds, which are just basically containers too.
Mhm.
As I tell people, that's something I'm definitely gonna look into, and maybe that's something we'll try and work on and maybe build that up and something for those new beds that we're doing and some of the other containers that I got, because I really like the idea of what you're talking about, and it makes a ton of sense,
Mhm.
and it's definitely worth setting up for sure.
It's been well proven to
Yeah.
date. There's a lot of people doing it. There's a
Yeah.
couple of big uh,
Yeah.
cannabis growers in New England, two of them now that have adopted the whole system and are already extremely excited with the performance. And this gentleman up north, Ken and I have had on the show a number of times. That was probably the second or third full scale installation of the Horizontal system, and he just
Yeah,
ran.
Tom Landry.
Yeah, Landry, Tom.
Yeah. So guys, I want to do the contest and the giveaways. So
Okay.
we're going to, let's see, I'm just going to set it up here and add it in. Okay, guys, it's
Hey.
hashtag compost,
All right.
and it's an e-course, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can take this chorus from Leighton Morrison. He's designed this. Leighton, give them a little bit of information on what they're going to get.
So I'm assuming this is the compost, the Hugo Culture version of compost making. He has another one that we'll talk about off the air some point in the future. So bottom line, one of the first things I did when I was down at Rodale was looked at the way that Elaine was composting, and she was following a similar protocol to a gentleman named Johnson, and his composting method was the Johnson-Su bioreactor. So they were growing in upright cages, and they're putting the greens and browns in there and then watering it. And I didn't like it because, first of all, it was a very small area connected to the soil below, and I liked windrows. So I went and harvested an old dried up punky log, and I laid it down on the soil, sprayed it with a compost extract. Then I got branches, laid it on top of it, basically made a teepee, and then started building the compost on top of that. And so basically I explained to you how to do this technique. It's a static pile, so you never turn it, which is important to balance the ratios, as I do explain in the demo, and how to harvest all these local indigenous plants, which are exactly what your area wants. So you're getting the endophytic bacteria and fungi that you need to support this advanced biological life. So you come back 6 months later and you're going to have some of the best compost you've ever seen in your life, and it will be biologically intensive. So it can be built anywhere.
And guys, that's what you're going to get through this Leighton's course. So anybody that hasn't put in #compost, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds more, and then we're going to run it. So what do you think, Enoch?
About this course?
Yeah, why haven't you put in #compost yet?
Oh, I'd have to get in there. I don't know, huh?
Hurry up.
Well, I'm through here. I don't know if I can get it on there.
So there's a little.
I'd have to get on my
computer.
Don't worry about it, Enoch. I'm just giving you a hard time. I needed to give people a couple of seconds to keep going.
I'm gonna get in here.
So all you had to do is hit that little join the chat underneath the comments, and you can pop right in there and go ahead and hashtag it.
Yeah, that should work.
So yeah, this is this whole thing is really, being mindful of it, putting good intention behind it. You'll see me talking about using a lot of water. We actually used some fish brew, which you can buy on fishbrew.com as a bioinoculant or a supercharger. So it turned out that when I made this compost down at Rodale, she had about 7 proteges that she'd brought in from all over the country who were really experienced in this methodology and sort of food web school. And so one day we had weekly meetings, and she was basically tearing the kids a new butthole because none of them had accomplished getting any protozoa or fungi in their Johnson-Su style bioreactors. And so I asked Elaine, hey, is it okay if I, try this? And because we're going to do it again. And I think it was, 2 months, or maybe it was only 45 days. I don't remember. But either way, she said, sure, of course you can, Leighton. So I built this exact compost style. And even though it wasn't fully decomposed, it was still decomposed enough that I could get the material that I wanted. I separated it with a screen to get out the fine particulate that had broken down. And then I used that and brought it in and had it tested against the kids. Well, she looked at all the kids, got mad at them again. Then she's, all right, Leighton, where's your sample? Gave it to her under the microscope. And she was just like, damn it. How did you do this?
That's awesome.
Guys, we're ready to go, and we're going to run it. Here we go. And my name shouldn't be in there, but because I put #compost. Okay, Southern VT.
There we go. Right on.
So, Southern, just send me an email at it's all about the biology at gmail.com, and we'll set you up with the proper links.
Congratulations, my friend.
Yeah.
And I'm going to jump back off and let you guys get back to it.
All right, sounds good. I don't
Excellent.
remember where the hell we were. We were talking about the horizontal soil system.
Yeah.
So the key is that you have a rubber liner, like your bucket tech, where you have a bucket under and a bucket in top. It's the
Yeah.
same idea. You have to have a liner of some kind underneath, and the key to that is the liner top, where it maxes out. It has to be about a quarter inch lower than the beginning of the A horizon. So that way, when the sand fills up, it has a way to escape without turning the A horizon into mud. That's the most important thing. And when you're building the E horizon, you want to, I encourage people to use a lot of different colored jagged rocks. You don't want to use smooth rocks because the bacteria can't attach to it. It's been
Right.
polished. So those jagged, broken pieces are perfect for the bacteria to set up their little biofilm home so that they can protect themselves and they can mine those nutrients. So I typically say, put in some different colored rock at the bottom, and then you want to get what we call a masonry sand or concrete sand. It should be yellow or taupey. Some I've even seen some brownish sand. That color is important. You don't want the white powdery stuff because that doesn't function as well. And then you apply that and you water it in. So you really water and trowel that sand to make sure that there's no air pockets below that. Because if there's air pockets and that organic matter, the fines we call them, gets through the sand filter, and I'm using that word purposely, sand filter, then you get in trouble because you can create anaerobic pockets down in the E horizon. I also encourage worms. They're really helpful at speeding up the interface between the A horizon and the O horizon, your potting soil. And you don't have to worry about roots going down into the E horizon. That's absolutely fine. What'll happen is that will slowly break down, but it's not going to cause anaerobic pockets. So the longest one that we've had running is about 6 years now, and he says it just gets better and better and better every year. So there's no concern about long-term issues with this system. It's a one and done as long as you build it right. Now, I've had people fuck with the recipe and have real problems because they didn't, follow the directions. So
yeah, I'm totally down for the experiment for sure and doing that. And we got a perfect opportunity coming up this next season and everything as we're going to rebuild some beds that I got back there and get that sort of set up because we're always looking for ways to improve the situation that we have, and one of the things I will say though, too, about a lot of our containers and the sort of thing I was talking about with the soil and the mix and the things that I'm doing and putting that together, you always know that things are going well with your soil when you can dig in there, and especially in containers, when you can dig in there or whatever and find worms living in there. So I know that we probably pick up some worm eggs from our, because I have a open outdoor alleyway composting thing that we do. Tons of worms get in there and all of that. So I'm sure that some of them worm eggs make it in there after we've sifted through everything, and then you get them going in there. And if it can go from eggs to growing fully grown worms and all of that, and they're living and crawling around inside of that bucket soil, then you're probably doing something pretty good.
Yeah, clearly, dude. Clearly. The key is the compost. Again, it's like Mother Nature's magic friggin' silver bullet. I don't care who uses it, how you use it, it has an effect. And even the garbage that comes from commercial compost facilities has a value. It has a nutritional value. Now they've gassed off all the nitrogen in the form of ammonia or methane, but there's other minerals and nutrients available in that material. So, and for you doing it in, to a point where you're getting worms into your compost is an indicator that you've got a great mix going on there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me at all that your containers.
Yeah. And then that becoming a big important part of even what I've done too, because the more I've learned about things and even learned about organic, you even mentioned earlier in that story about that place you were working at or trying to fix up and everything, is you had this company or whatever that called themselves organic. you know, and there's, a lot of things, there's labeled organic or this and that, and you find out it's not really. And it's not really as organic as what we'd want. And I'm one of those people who are like, I want things to be as simple as possible and easy enough for people to do and understand for themselves without having to go out and buy a bunch of stuff or do all this sort of thing. And when it comes down to it, that stuff and those methods are really some of the most organic, natural things you can do. And that is just composting. Big thing I did that changed everything for me really was I started, my own worm bins. I got a bunch of worm bins and all of that. I'm growing my own worms to get the vermicompost, and we're utilizing that as our amendments to our soil. And like I was saying, it's really what I only feed anymore. I don't have to go out and buy fertilizers.
Mhm.
I don't have to go out and spend so much money on my garden because what I can do for practically almost free. I mean, I do got to buy the base worms to get started. And then from there, it's just, it gets going. Compost, all we got to do is break down the things that we've got in our own garden we're growing and just kind of create a regenerative cycle and all of that. And then the next thing you know, I've got one of the most inexpensive gardens out there, and it's more natural than you'll find in anything else that you're spending money on.
The craziest part about it is people don't understand that plant took all of this energy working by leaking out egg states, feeding the bacteria to pull that stuff back up. It burned a ton of ADP doing all this.
Hmm.
If you just fed the plant itself, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to do that hard of work because you've broken it down. It's almost plant
Hmm.
available at that point. So
Yeah.
feeding the plant is the key to the whole thing. And if you get into natural farming or Korean natural farming, they talk a lot about fermenting and plant juices, and that's another one that you probably ought to look into because your audience will love this stuff because you make all your own ferments, you make all your own fertilizers, you make
Yeah.
one for flower, you make one for vegetative growth. You could target specifically. I want to make a tomato ferment. Sure, no problem. You use that tomato, you make that ferment, and then use that ferment back on your tomatoes. You're giving them exactly what they want. So
Yeah.
how easy is that? Um,
Exactly.
right?
And some
So
of the most basic, easiest stuff is some of the best stuff that we can be doing. And that was just one of those another big things about gardening and learning the processes and everything over time, which, was really a huge epiphany for me was just, wow, wait a minute. If I don't actually just go spend money on all of this stuff, I could find ways right here at home in order to improve and make things even better that are just which is the more natural thing to do.
and the other thing too is like One Straw Revolution. That's another great book or resource for people to understand that you gotta like be a steward, not
Yeah.
try to tell everything in the garden what to do, but just be there, be a steward, and
Yeah.
show it love, give it attention. But the bottom line is less is sometimes more in these situations. If you take your hands off and let the plant do what the plant wants, it's going to tell you everything. Oh
Yep.
shit, I got a ton of pests on this plant. What
Mm.
happened?
Yep.
Obviously, you did something wrong, or that plant was chosen by nature to be wiped out. And let's face
Mm.
it, there are certain things in nature that are born or grown that were not suitable for consumption. And the insects are just doing their job by recycling it and putting it back into the soil. So,
Yeah.
all of these little techniques really help to make it a lot easier and way less expensive than buying stuff, whether it's buying soil or buying compost or buying fertilizer. You can do it all yourself. Just be lazy. Just make a
Yeah.
pile and walk away. And in spring, you got everything you need to start your garden.
It's amazing. I mean, that was the thing. I had this little spot in the back alleyway that which wasn't going to be able to be used for much anything else. And so I was like, you know what? Let's just start dumping all of the plant waste over there.
Yeah.
Let's just start putting that in there, and I just let it pile up, and I don't do anything. I don't hot compost. I don't try to, stir it up or anything like that. I just
You
let
don't
it
need to.
go, and I let it go. And once a year, I pull off the top and I grab the bottom and I sift through it, and and I utilize that. And what I add to either my recycled soil or whatever additional soil I will put into that big pile, I say, and I let it be a pile too, even if I'm getting some bag soil that someone might give me. I had someone give me a bunch of this stuff that they worked for one of our towns here and had a bunch of it extra. And I was like, can you use this? And I was like, oh yeah, for sure. And I just put it into this pile, mix it all up, and then let it kind of sit, because then I'm letting everything kind of grow and let all that biology and all that stuff start grow in there. And then after a while, by that time next year, that I'm going to be using this and putting into any of these containers and all of that, it's built up some really great soil biology, and then all we have to do is, like I said, make some of these for me, make some of these vermicompost teas in order to just kind of keep that life rolling.
Yeah, and you brought up something earlier that really has been driving me nuts for years, and that is Omri. Omri is now
Right.
slipping in urea and other products in their organically labeled product sheets. So,
Hmm.
please, audience, and I think I got to bang this home with you too, Enoch, is just tell people they got to read what's in it. They got to find out what the ingredients is. And if you're buying something that has 90% inert, so inert means nothing, water.
Yep. Yeah.
You're buying 5%, 10%, not 100%. And then also the old, like, oh, it's got all these different bacteria, blah 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 blah, and then at the bottom you see, oh, 15% urea. No, that's fertilizer. That is not a bioinoculant. So,
Right.
really, I pray that you beat that into your listeners' minds, that they've really got to do their homework on anything
Yeah.
they're adding, because that's how you cause problems. You start using urea, you're going to see plant reaction, you're going to see growth, no doubt. But what
Hmm.
comes out of that is going to have less vitamins, less minerals, less nutrition, harder to digest, more water, and whatever biology you had, you killed it when it came in
Yeah.
contact with the salts that there's used to deliver urea. So,
Hmm.
Lane used to say, "Oh, don't worry, Leighton, it's a repeat client." And I'm like, "No, I don't want repeat clients. I want people to fix their soil and walk away water only, because there's too much work to be done.
Hmm.
Go back and fix shit people fucked up. Excuse my language."
Right.
So anyway, that's
Yeah.
part of my frustration in this day and age about mislabeling, misinformation,
Yeah.
redirection, and
It's just that stuff drives me nuts. And there's so much of it out there. One of the things I've also started doing, and I'm going to probably talk about this just a little bit more when I get a good opportunity on my show, about misinformation out there, especially for me. I get mostly concerned about, really people who are new to this, because as sort of what we were talking about earlier, I think it's really important that people understand gardening and understand that they can garden, and that it's not as complicated, and it's, again, maybe like, people get it in their mind that it's really hard and all of that. And there's just some really simple basic stuff, that we can learn to get a good base understanding, that we can run with that. But if you go as a person who's just learning about gardening and learning about growing, and you start going out to say, because I used to go into all these gardening groups you'll find online, and you go and ask a question. Well, how do I deal with this in my garden? Then you look at those comment sections of people who are, talking and like they know what they're talking about, but with someone with just a little bit of experience can go, oh, wait a minute, that's not quite right, you know? But I've got a little bit of experience to know that. But what does that do for someone who has no experience, who's wondering about that question, who wants to learn that in their garden, and they're being fed all of this misinformation from people who are acting as though they know what they're talking about, and then you're completely misled. You're going to end up having some failures that might dissuade you from going any further. And
agreed.
and it's rampant just as much as it is with anything else that you might go online and talk about with a large group of people. You're just going to find a ton of misinformation constantly. And to me, I used to encourage people to go out and join some garden groups and to learn from the gardening community out there and all that. And even though I really, really love the gardening community, I think it's one of the best communities out there, is if you get into these places online, it's, again, that misinformation just becomes too much. And so I don't encourage people to do that anymore. Don't go online and ask questions from just anybody, or just a large group of people, and because you'll find 20 different answers with 20 different people who are talking as though they know what they're talking about. And again, I used to try to be one of those people who would be like, oh, wait a minute, this is misinformation. This is, and try to beat that back or do that. But then I only become one of those other people who sounds like, or trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And I become just a part of the mix and the problem, even though, I feel as though I know, that this isn't the best information for you. And so, really what we can be doing is finding, things out there and people out there who, that you can learn from and have done things. That's why people with really good experience and things like that. Mostly what I encourage people to is you go and find people locally, or you can go check out some gardens and you can see what they're doing and find that sort of stuff, because we do have to learn from others in one way or another.
Agreed.
It's just online. Just online is just, it's become a place where you can't learn anything.
No, and we call that bro science in the cannabis community, because one person with an ego is like, oh, I know what I'm doing. It's like, no, clearly you don't. And if I attack you, then all of a sudden now I'm the bad guy when I'm trying to prevent other people from making the mistakes that you're trying to tell them to do. So I usually use resources like the Symphony of the Soil, Jeff Lowenfeld's trilogy. You know, one or the other. If you're a visual learner, watch the DVD, watch the documentary. If you're a reader, read the trilogy. And those are the things that are going to keep you from making those critical mistakes and then getting discouraged when you can't grow a garden. I mean, remember during COVID, how many people started victory gardens?
Yeah.
And then so many crashed and burned because of exactly what you're saying. All of the misinformation out there on everything, fertility to watering, to the use of herbicides, pesticides, and so a lot of people crashed and burned, and they turned their back, and they're never going to start gardening again. When in many ways they could have created their own food security for their family and had been able to eat guaranteed organic food, because, dude, the organic companies are lying and cheating, and I've seen it so bad that you see people peeling off the labels and sticking on an organic label so they can increase the price at the supermarket because they're trying to hold on, right? So there's just, the only food security is one, know your farmer, go to farmer's market, go to that farm, look at their practices, look if they're using Roundup, understand if they're using animals for fertility, all of these things that can make sure that I am eating clean food. And if you're not eating clean food, I'm sorry, you're exposing yourself to potentially all of these health issues, which can bankrupt you by the time you get to be our age. So, that's really kind of another mission that we have as educators or entertainers, is to give these people these resources that can steer them away from the noise and let them actually music or the truth. So typically at 1 hour, 30 minutes, we take questions and Ken comes on and asks them. So we've got
excellent.
So let's go ahead and dive into those. Thanks,
Right
Ken.
You betcha. Let's start with this one. Is this YouTube VIP pepper grower in on the Pepper X program, or is it only commercial licensed growers still?
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, great question. In fact, we had Ed Curry on our show earlier this year to talk with him all about all of his records and all of that sort of stuff. And no, I think you got to be really close to that guy in a very trusted way if he's going to let you in on that sort of stuff. I did ask him about that. I was like, oh man, I didn't get some seeds. You got to send me some seeds for sure. Because I mean, I'm not much of a hot pepper eater. I've tried a few, and that's about as enough as I need as far as that goes. But I love growing pepper plants, as I talked about. I love growing plants in general. And I tried growing a few different varieties of some really hot peppers and everything. In fact, I just ran into someone earlier who did one of my first live streams I did, where we did a taste test of one of these really hot peppers that I grew one year. And so they're fun in that sort of sense. But no, the Pepper X I can't get a hold of. And I'll just tell you, Ed, and for what he kind of explained to us too, was that when it came to his Carolina Reaper, he really kind of got ran over on that one because he just released it and he just kind of let it out there, and everybody took it and ran with it and started doing all sorts of stuff like that too. So for the Pepper X, he's being very careful, very, very careful with that one. So can't wait. Someday it's going to be out there. Someday we're going to be able to check it out and grow it and do all of that. But it's probably still down the road a little ways.
Have you tried using your peppers as a foliar to get rid of bugs or anything like that? Because I know that's something some people do.
I did actually try that a few years back, and I think it really works well for some of those aphids and things like that get on there and all of that. And so yeah, in some experimenting and all of that sort of stuff, it's good. I haven't really just used it regularly though. I've tried that mixing with some like other types of herbs and different things that can be also helpful as well too. But yeah, those, and again too, that kind of comes down to having fun with experimenting and things, with natural things as well out of your garden and stuff that you can do. And almost like what Leighton was saying too, you're really just kind of feeding your garden to your garden when you're doing that anyways. So why not, right?
Yeah, building strength.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's see here. Could you do a quick run through on how to make one of those pots that you have on the carport?
Yeah, absolutely. Really. And it's really simple too. And you just, I did a video too, and it's not just simple, but it's also really, really inexpensive. And as I mentioned before too, is that I like to do things that makes it more accessible to people, especially people who are on a budget to garden. Gardening doesn't have to be really expensive. So however you can acquire some of these buckets, and again too, I'm not much for plastic, when it comes down to that, but reusing and giving something another purpose is something really great to do. So what I do is, and I recommend people do, is to go to some of these sandwich shops, get some of their buckets they're tossing out, go to restaurants, bakeries, and things like that, so you can get some buckets, and that way you're getting them basically for free. No cost.
And they're food safe.
And food safe, exactly.
Yeah, it's a different type of plastic being used.
Yeah. Don't get any of their buckets they're using for their dishwashers.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Get the ones that they had some pickles coming out of or something like that. And yeah. So again, that's free. You got to go and get these little net pots. These are little net pots that they use for like aquaponics and hydroponics and things like that as well. And these are very inexpensive too. When you buy them, you can buy them in like 20, and they come in and they end up, being like 25 cents a piece or something like that. And then also some PVC. We use a half-inch PVC. And so that, and then all you got to do is drill some holes around the bottom. And guess one other thing that you would have to have, or if you can get, is a 3-inch hole saw. So you're going to take one of those buckets and you're going to drill a bunch of holes, and then right in the center, put a 3-inch hole in there. Or even some that we've also done as well too, is we put like 3-inch holes around the bottom of a bucket too, so we could put 3 net pots down versus just the one in the center. I haven't found much of a difference though. The one in the center seems to work just as fine as the 3 do. But so you put a little 3-inch hole on the bottom of that one bucket. It's got a bunch of holes in the bottom of it, and then along the side, on the very edge of that bucket, you'll put a little 1/2-inch hole as well too. So you have to drill a 1/2-inch hole. So that 1/2-inch PVC goes right down through that and runs up tall enough to poke out of the top of the bucket there, and then go all the way down to the bottom of what will be the second bucket, which is the bottom bucket, which is your reservoir bucket. And then the reservoir bucket, all you're going to really do with that is drill 2 holes that are just below the bottom line of that top bucket. So when you set the top bucket in, they'll sit in about, they'll give you about 4 inches or so, 3.5, 4 inches. So right at that mark, you want to put 2 holes that are just an overflow, because you don't want, again, creating an anaerobic situation by having water sitting in water, or if it rains and it's going through, the water will drain right up to what the level of that net pot. So only the net pot's sitting in that water. And so, yeah, you just put those together and you fill it up with the soil and all of that. And then again, you'll have that PVC up that pokes out of the top that you send the water right down into that reservoir bucket. And it's just nice and easy, just like that.
Well, he also wants to know, does it differ really from the Crackety system?
Yeah, well, Cracky is not going to be using soil in a sense, right? I mean, they're using, I think Cracky uses a lot of those little
Hydroton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but in a similar way, that stuff's absorbing up the water in a similar way like that. But with our system, we're actually using soil.
Yeah, I've actually seen it done where they've dug it into the ground, and they used roof gutter to have the pots in, and then they're only watering from the one end, and they have a continuous flow going.
Yeah. Again, too, another way of kind of getting that to just create, again, some sort of water from the bottom, creating that capillary action to let the, basically just letting the container water itself with as much as it needs.
Yeah, it really helps keep the biology happy and alive in there.
Oh, it's so important. Exactly. Because again, too, you talk about that hydrophobic situation that can get created if it gets dried out. I mean, what a worse way to keep biology by drying it out, right? And it's so important with containers. Why I'm really actually excited about trying Leighton's idea with my other containers, doing that as well too, because I think that'll help with some of those situations that I'm dealing with those other containers.
Yeah. Leighton, did you have something to say, brother?
No, I'm yelling at Poe.
Oh, okay. The star of the show.
That's right.
We're arguing over a toy. So,
excellent.
Okay. Could Enoch explain what people will experience on your weekend live streams?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't expect any better question from Jay. That's for sure. Yeah. Again, too, more conversation, more discussion with all sorts of people throughout the gardening community. There's tons of people out there who, share what they do through, whether it's videos and some really great channels that are out there. And, as well, we have authors and other podcasters, or just people in general throughout the gardening community that to have conversations with and talk about just our love and passion for gardening and growing. So every Saturday and Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we get together on our Let's Get Growing show, and our Sunday edition of the show, and have all these great guests on. Saturday's more of a, we highlight small channels at the beginning of our show. So we have a segment called "Are You Following Me?" where so that we can promote and give some love to some of those small channels out there who are sharing and doing things and great things in the gardening community, and give them some recognition. And then the later half of the show is more of a long form podcast conversation similar to here, where we just dig in with some just really more, I hate to say more popular people in that sense, but bigger channels and gardeners out there to just kind of learn about what they're doing and all of that as well, and just continues that conversation to help people learn and understand more. And I was just kind of saying at the beginning too, here as we were getting going, is that I've never really considered myself a gardening expert. So when it comes down to it, I get to have all of these great people on my show who do know a lot of great things about gardening. So I'm sitting here having these conversations, asking these questions, and getting to learn so much from these
Yep.
people. You know what I mean? So if I'm learning things myself as the host of this show, then I know that there's a lot of great value out there for everybody else who's watching as well too. So we love to have fun with that. It's, you know, it's really a more of like what you would find on a show, you know, a commercial show out there. We have a little segments and things. We got Sarah from one of our seed company, favorite little seed gardeners, a young entrepreneur from Sarah Seeds, who does a little trivia for us. And, and we'll have all these different things that we have on there and everything. Sunday, we do things a little bit differently. We have a garden round table, which would be more like this. We'd have a couple of different people and we'll have some discussions on some of our Sundays. And then we have a regular guest that we bring on to do gardening questions. A master gardener, Scott Wilson from the Gardener Scott channel, comes on, joins us for a great discussion on every second Sunday of the month. And then every third Sunday of the month, we do a gardening book club where we bring on an author and we kind of highlight a book, throughout the month, and then bring that author on to talk and discuss all of that as well too for that. So we have lots of great fun things to do on our channel and fun discussions and all of that as well too. So again, if anybody hasn't had a chance to check out, I hope to see you there and learn some more with all of our great gardeners we have.
Now, it would be best to send them to your channel or to send them to your YouTube?
YouTube, definitely is the better way to go. And I try to get out shows, at least a week or so ahead of time, so that if you come to our YouTube main page, you'll see upcoming streams, and you can always hit that little notify button right there too. So if you see someone you really don't want to miss that's going to be on the show, you want to hit that notify. That way you'll be notified about it coming up.
Cool, fantastic. And Perpetual said that the promoting small channels, he says, like this one, it's all about biology.
Yeah, exactly. And again, too, and what we had Leighton on as well, too, talking about that for that. And we'll have to have you, Ken, on and talk about it as well, too, coming up as well, because that's just one of the, my channel's not that big. I'm just really fortunate enough to have been able to network with some of the, bigger channels and bigger people out there. So, for me, being able to do that sort of thing, to be able to have a bigger channel on, but then have also a smaller channel, give them a little bit of support, is a big thing, because, that's just one of the best things we can do for each other in the gardening community, is help support each other,
Caring, sharing, and community, my friend.
That's right. At the top of our, on our show, our little background that we have on the very top of it is kind of our mantra, we're growing community through gardening. Exactly.
So next question, what do you all recommend to keep biology alive in my outdoor containers during the off season here in Southern California? Cover crops that are about 13 gallon pots. And he says he lives on a north exposure, so not a lot of light.
Yeah.
No bare soil, my friend.
Exactly. That's basically what I was going to say. Is I've got a couple of trees just right out front, and they haven't even actually, and coming back to this idea of how warm it is late in the fall right now, they haven't even started dropping leaves yet, which is crazy, but they should start dropping leaves eventually. And then I'll take all those leaves and mulch them down, and then I cover all of my spaces and really heavily mulch that up. And my question, though, too, I suppose to Leighton or yourself would be, is when we do get cold enough in the winter that it freezes, is that really damaging my biology, or is it kind of putting them in a stasis in a sense?
Absolutely. It's called cyst or spore. So come spring, they all come right back to life. We call that also, another term is necromass.
Yeah.
And a lot of the biology, I mean, they've documented smoke and ash from wildfires as being a biological inoculant. Most recent, there was a study done at, I think it was 10,000 feet in the atmosphere. Again, they were finding protozoa, they were finding bacteria, fungi, spores. So they're everywhere. So even if in a devastating situation like an earthquake, tornado, volcano, life is going to come back. It's just a matter of time. We work on human scale instead of geological scale.
Yeah.
When human scale is nothing. It's a snap of a finger of that in the big picture. So yeah, no, I will often encourage people to either, mulch like you're doing, or you could put hay bales around it if you don't want it to freeze and you want to get an early start on it. If your weather allows you to do that, those are a couple ways to, really kind of speed up that spring process. And you can just leave the hay bales around them until the summer.
I've seen people growing in straw bales and hay bales, and then once it breaks down in the fall, that's new soil that they've created.
Yeah. Mushrooms are wonderful on hay bales.
Yep.
Yeah. Although I will say I did have a guest on just yesterday on my show who gave me a piece of information I didn't think about as well too, because we talk about not having bare soil. But as far as if we're trying to build up pollinators in our area and help with pollinators and stuff, they recommend actually having a small percentage of bare soil, because there are native bees and things like that that do bury and create their nests and things like that as well too. So they will cover most everything, but always kind of create a little space that will allow for some of that as well too. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Definitely.
Because there's several, and it wasn't just one. There's like several different things that can use that sort of space.
Bumblebees, wasps. A lot of the wasps
Wasps for ground exactly,
ground wasps
and that sort of stuff.
Mud daubers, I think a lot of them called.
Yeah, exactly. And I never thought about that as well too, because I've always had that understanding as well too. Let's cover everything. And I'm like, well, you know what? Keep a little bit for these folks over here, because that's what they're searching for when they're
because a lot of them, they're looking for old mouse nests in the soil. But your mud daubers, especially, they do need that moist mud to be able. Because how they do it is they have an egg, then they put in food, and then they put it in a mud wall. They have an egg, and they're layering. So that for that you do, but a lot of them will just use water and dig dirt from the soil itself.
It's interesting stuff. Always
remember, nature's not perfect. In nature, you're going to have bare spots. Maybe something died there, or maybe it got covered with leaves and that killed off any seedlings that could have come up. But nature finds a way.
That's the key, is nature finds a way.
Exactly.
Last question from JT. What's everyone's take on using urine, as that's urea, right? Or is urea an after product from a process?
Urea is an after product from distillation of natural gas. So no, urea is a man-made product. I mean, it's something astounding, like 50 barrels of oil for 1 50-pound bag of urea. And that's not including shipping it across the world, Ukraine. So no, urea is different. Now urine, I highly recommend you do it. Some people like to dilute it, 10 to 1 with water and use that as a fertilizer. It works fantastic. Personally, I always piss outside because I don't want to waste water in California.
For sure.
Kind of changed lately, but it's just become a habit at this point. But I'll always find it.
Peter says piss on your plants discreetly now.
Exactly.
Well, I'm really blessed.
Yeah, you don't want to be alarming your neighbors.
I can spit over the fence and hit pretty much everybody in the neighborhood, but because of the trees blocking the windows, the hedges blocking, a couple of different neighbors, I'm so blessed that I could literally walk around naked in Southern California with houses surrounding me and no one can see me.
Oh man, that's great.
Really,
that scares me for some reason. Okay, we have laws against that, Leighton.
Well,
I love it.
Pauline used to love to sunbathe nude, and I did not complain.
Right.
I'm not. Yep.
I guess it all depends on who's doing it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Amen
that's
to
it for
that.
questions, guys.
All right. Well, that was cool. That was easy. Well,
Yeah.
is there any follow-up questions you have, Enoch, on anything that we talked about today?
Well, I don't know if I really got any more questions. I think it's again too, it's just really fun to have a great conversation about things and again too, just to be able to hang out and talk about all this sort of stuff. This has just been a really fun experience here. And I really happy that you asked me to come here and hang out today.
Yeah. Well, again, it's it's education. It's giving and entertaining too. Come on, let's
Yeah.
some of the stories we tell are entertaining. I mean, everybody
Hmm.
loves a good story,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and there's always lessons in those stories, which I think is even more important because it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a parable. It's easy to understand. It's an experience. You use the word expert. Well, in my mind, an expert is someone that knew something at some point in time, but stopped
Yeah.
learning. And that's
Right.
where I say I'm a great student. I'm no
Yeah.
expert. I'm just a really, really good student, and I want to know. And so
Hmm.
I dive. I go down these rabbit holes. Some of the papers I'm reading right now are just ridiculously complicated. It
Yeah.
took me years to learn how to read them and pull information out of them.
Yeah.
But this is something you build on time. It's not like you just jump into a white paper and expect to understand it.
Exactly.
The words they use, the resources they cite in the papers, they all begin to come familiar because in the topics that you're looking at, oh, I saw this guy on this paper. I saw the same guy on this paper and that paper and this paper because they're reciting the foundation of what this gentleman learned. But
Mhm.
there's hundreds of these people that are all reductionist type scientists who are trying to suss out pieces of information. And
Yeah.
so they have to reduce to get that one piece of information. But then when they write a white paper and they start plugging in those little pieces, all of a sudden it makes a puzzle.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's all about learning. And you'll hear me often on the podcast say, hey, look, what I'm telling you right now could change tomorrow. And
Yeah.
it's not because I changed or I didn't know. I was
Yeah.
educated on everything up until this point. Well, there's new data coming out of this college or this university or this brain group that's basically showing our conception was incorrect.
Yeah,
Like
there's just so many things as human beings that we still have no clue of, that we're
oh
still
God,
in the process of learning about. And again, too, I love what you say there because that's the point, is that we are always students. We'll always be students. Some of the best gardeners that I look up to the most, who've been gardening 40, 50 years, will still tell you the same thing, that they're still learning. They're still figuring things out and learning new things in each and every season that they grow and garden. And I think that's kind of the kind of the point ultimately is, for me, is that if we're not learning or always learning, then we're not really gardening, because we have to be students of the world we live in constantly. It's so hard for anything to become a fact or a law in the sense of science. I mean, it has to take so much experimentation and just centuries of it, even sometimes, before we can look at things in that sort of way, and some things we just never will be able to.
you
So
know,
I mean, life is just a constant learning process, and we always have to be willing to keep our minds open enough to be able to accept that.
and one of the things that I bump into a lot of permaculturists.
Yeah.
And I love the concept of permaculture. I love poly
Mhm.
planting and getting collecting rainwater, creating swales and berms. All that stuff is fantastic, but it doesn't account for climate change. And so when I'm working with a permaculture, it's like, no, you got to do it
Yeah.
this way, this way, this way. It's like, dude, you guys got to kind of get a little bit more loose and focused on the fact that
Yeah.
even your permaculture is going to get run down. It's going to get run
Yeah.
over sooner or later by
Mhm.
something, whether it's a fire, whether it's a earthquake, tornado, whatever. It's going to get taken out. So not only do you have to think about the long term, you need to also be thinking about the short term. Like, what are the
Yeah.
gains immediately? Because if something does happen and you do lose your farm, now you've put all your energy into the far out instead of, hey, reel it back in. Let's get some stuff out of this now. So there's something bad happens, I'm not completely wiped out, or I didn't lose everything for the last 10 years that I've been working toward.
Yeah.
And so the perma is especially nowadays should be taken out of it. It shouldn't be about, well, I'm building this for 5 generations ahead of me. That was fine, in the 1800s, no problem, right? That was great planning. But nowadays it's a different animal. We need to be thinking
with industrialization and what we're doing to everything, and that's been going on since, and what we've got to look forward in the future. It does, like you said, nothing's really 100%.
No.
And when it comes down to it,
if we get wiped out today, 25 years from now, most of it will be unrecognizable, other than dams. Cities will still have, the
buildings
that have not disintegrated yet, but the roads, the houses, gone.
Yeah. Eventually, though, give it 1,000 years, and it'll take down. They'll take down skyscrapers. It'll take down all those dams and all that sort of stuff, and revert itself back to a natural situation. And that's what we have to respect about the world around us. We're just human beings, just trying to figure things out and trying to do the best that we can in some senses, unless there's too much money brought into the situation, and people are, and that's when things really start to break down, and our understanding of things just really break down as well too. And again, it comes down to the point of being open to learning things and to figuring things out. And, because of that myself, I feel like I've become a better gardener myself, in learning better processes and things. And again, too, with the sort of stuff that we're doing with these conversations and talking with each other about this stuff, is helping push that forward and help that understanding, have a larger audience, because it's important. It's important that we understand those things around us in those sort of ways.
That's why I tell people, listen to many voices.
Yes.
And take what you can from each, because
and that's exactly what makes this sort of show great. The sort of thing that I'm doing as well too is that we get all these different voices and all these different people to talk about all these different things, and hopefully we're grabbing a few things and learning a few things out of it that we can actually apply to what we're doing, and hopefully see better results, or if not, in the long run, we're just learning just a little bit more.
Well, hey, my friend, thank you so much for coming on. We'll definitely have to have you on again in the future.
Absolutely. Anytime. Really great. And again, too, we'll have to have you guys back on too. And for everybody else that's out there watching and all of that, I really encourage you to come check us out at Let's Get Growing and all that. I will forward promote one thing though, too, because we talked about I talked to the record pepper, Ed Curry, we had on the show. This next weekend, we've got Travis Ganger from Minnesota, who grew the world's largest pumpkin last year at 2,749 pounds. And he's going to be joining us on his way to Half Moon Bay to have his new pumpkin Rudy weighed. So we're going to have a fun conversation with him and talk all about growing giants this next weekend.
Nice. Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Ken, as always, thank you, my friend, for all your hard work and behind the scenes that nobody understands.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so great to have someone back there doing all of that. I mean, I got to keep the conversation going and do all of that sort of stuff. Man, you got it made.
Don't you know? But he and his wife dragged me out of retirement. So it's all their fault that I'm still here.
Oh, sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah, guys, as for the channel, Wednesday, we've got 10 steps to a healthy and bountiful garden with Andy Lopez and myself. And then I don't have any book for Friday. We're still waiting for confirmation for Monday. But guys, every week's going to be a great week on this station. So come back soon. Welcome everybody in chat. See you on the next show.
Excellent. Thank you.